What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that The Cursed is no perfect movie. And The Curse takes place in the 1880s, where a pathologist played by Boyd Holbrook is hired to investigate the disappearance of a baron's young son. But when other townspeople start to show up dead, seemingly mauled by a wolf, and Holbrook uncovers evidence as to how this village acquired this specific land in the first place, he comes to the conclusion that the attackers are werewolves summoned by a Romani curse to punish and eliminate the rest of the villagers for the mistreatment that the Baron inflicted upon their settlement. And like just about everyone else, I had no idea this movie even existed until reviews started popping out of nowhere. In my case, I found a review from Brad Jones, the cinema snob, who wasn't even planning on seeing it until he got sent a screener from the production company. And he loved it so much that he was willing to go back and see it in a theater. And I trusted his judgment enough to go in as blind as possible, just know that it's a werewolf thriller with Boyd Holbrook. And I highly recommend that you all do the same. Do not look up any research, do not look up any pictures, and the end results will hit you incredibly hard. The scare sequences will take you so much more by surprise. If it's the kind of horror movie that you're going for, if you're scared by A24 style horror movies like The Witch, The Empty Man, or The Night House, where the horror comes from the things that you don't understand, the discoveries and reactions that characters make in given situations, as opposed to loud bursts of jump scares, tons of expository monologues, and just an all around lazy sense that modern horror movies are relying on nowadays, then this is definitely going to be the horror movie for you, and one that I cannot believe was A24. But if you want something that's a little more simple and mainstream in its execution, you're actually probably going to be bored for the majority of this film because it is a slow burn that feels more like a drama and a mystery movie at certain points before it does turn into a full-fledged werewolf monster movie. But one thing that I found very interesting going in was that this was written and directed by Sean Ellis, who also serves as the cinematographer for all of his movies. And I gotta say, the visual style is the reason to check out The Curse. The cinematography accomplishes a rare feat where the movie creates this bleak, dreary, monochromatic look to it where the sets and costumes all have these murky shades of black, brown, and blue that instantly create a sense of dread, even in the most mundane of sequences. But the staging of the actors, the lighting in the frame, where even in broad daylight, the forests that these characters all live around are constantly shrouding the main characters in silhouettes. There's this never ending fog that exists whenever they go into the forest to search for missing villagers. And the editing that's a lot more drawn out. There are shots that linger for longer periods of time to make the audience anticipate what's going to happen next, particularly in the first 10 minutes where the Baron sends out some mercenaries to threaten and in some cases kill a Romani settlement. And as I say that, even if I said approach a Romani settlement, you know exactly what's going to happen. You know you're not going to enjoy a shred of it. But it was filmed entirely in one take, it never cuts away, and all the actors and props are so perfectly symmetrical in composition that you're unbelievably stressed out just waiting for the carnage to get over with. Little details like that make a huge difference and make nearly every shot in this movie feel as if it were a portrait made in the 1800s. But when it has to be a full-fledged horror movie, the monster attacks were so effective that I actually started shaking. I haven't felt that way since seeing Last Night in Soho when I was in Toronto, but granted, there are a few too many dream sequences that are pretty repetitive and that every character actually experiences the same nightmare over and over again, but there are slight differences depending on which character is going through these premonitions. And it always ends with a fucking stupid jump scare of a monster popping out. But in a weird way, I can actually kind of forgive that because these nightmares actually motivate the characters to delve deeper into the mystery surrounding this curse. But needless to say, when the werewolf does show up, the imagination behind the mythos, how a werewolf approaches its prey, how it can transform a human into a werewolf was unfucking believable. For starters, you only see it in full appearance once or twice throughout the near 2 hour runtime. The majority, up until the climax, you only see little bits and pieces to build up how big this creature is, how menacing it is, whether it can take multiple victims on one at a time. So, for example, in maybe my favorite kill scene, when a woman is searching for her husband who has disappeared into the woods and she hears these strange sounds, just when you think something is going to pop out into the woods, she sees something else happen. She sees what she believes to be a friend of hers. But as she slowly approaches that human, you catch for just a couple seconds the wolf's foot as it's devouring that man. And when the wolf jumps up, pounces on the woman, you can barely see its nostril entering the frame. Teeth are just gnarling at her face. And it cuts to a POV shot of the wolf chasing and attacking this woman. I love it when a horror movie does that. If you want to show a creature or a ghost less often, film it from the ghost or the creature's perspective so that you can hint at how much destruction it's capable of and maintain the mystery. And naturally, because it is a werewolf, it's going to lead to some pretty brutal kills that I was a little scared about going in because I didn't know how big of a budget they would have in regards to the special effects. But much to my surprise, this is actually this movie is heavy in practical effects that are extremely top notch. A diehard horror fan would love the kills and the gore that this movie features. Whenever someone has a limb hacked off, you really feel the impact. Whenever a limb is ripped off, it is shown in one take. The textures of the fake limbs and the blood look incredibly realistic, but the shot doesn't linger on the destruction too long for it to come across as exploitation. My favorite scene in the entire movie that would have been worthy of price of admission alone was an autopsy sequence where, without spoiling what happens, a person does have a werewolf and dissects it in front of everyone to show how the transformation works. And oh, fuck. I was sitting down the entire time. In the back of my head, it felt like I had whiplash that spread down to my body. It hurt just to sit for a solid 10 minutes or so. The transformation, the anatomy of this thing was so original. I have no idea if it's based on other mythologies around the world, but if so, I can't believe we're just discovering this shit right now. And the fact that Boyd Holbrook, as he was doing this, was so nonchalant and calm about it compared to the other villagers, that's all the more unsettling, and it raises certain questions about him. Which, let's talk about the characters in this movie. They're pretty thin when it comes to depth. If anything, the majority of them are just there to die. And when a character pops up for the very first time, or someone who was a side character in the background, you don't remember their name, but you know they're going to die anyways, they're written so that we as an audience member can put ourselves into their perspective on a given situation. So, for example, if a maid of the Baron is actually bitten by a werewolf and survives, but she knows good and hell well that because she's infected, she's going to die anyways, does she keep this secret from the other villagers? Does she run away? If she does decide to stay and keep it a secret, how long can she do that for? How long can she maintain a facade? For the most part, actors like that do a great job at conveying that form of terror. But the only two characters who have even a shred of complexity are Boyd Holbrook as the pathologist and Alistair Petrie from Sex Education as the Baron. But that's really about it. It even takes a long time for Holbrook to even be a main character in the film, because to Ellis's credit as a screenwriter, as opposed to starting off with Holbrook entering this town, being approached to investigate, and being told what has happened on this land and what's happening to the villagers through expository monologues and flashbacks, the first act is mostly just told from the perspective of the townspeople. And I thought that was incredibly unique for a movie from a studio and a budget like this. But when he's given the opportunity to shine, Holbrook was so good that this might actually be his best performance. And you can tell when this character starts to investigate with, just through his facial expressions alone, how unfazed he is by the situation. Those questions that are raised make you wonder whether or not he actually believed in the supernatural before he was called to investigate. Does he have experience in sighting these creatures or fighting these creatures? And when you do find out his backstory, it answers questions in a way that felt earned and respected while still raising a certain level of mystery as to how much this has actually affected him personally. Because without spoiling what exactly happened to him in his past, he's had a long time to reflect and cope with this information that is jarring and brand new to these people who have never experienced a supernatural event in their life unless they prayed for something in church and they instantly got what they wanted. Alistair Petrie as the Baron actually surprised me a fair bit because, as opposed to so many other snooty British villains who are so pompous, loud, and outspokenly arrogant, he's actually a lot more restrained in his interactions between him and Holbrook, and it makes him a lot more sinister because he knows deep down that the curse is his fault. He feels remorseful for all the people in his village who have died because he's given them opportunities that have helped them thrive and prosper. But because they have thrived and prospered, he doesn't feel any remorse for the violence he inflicted on the Romani because deep down at the end of the day, his family and his community are the only people he's really out to protect. He doesn't give a shit about anyone else, especially when it comes down to Holbrook. I would have liked a little bit more of Kelly Reilly as the Baron's wife, and I'll say this, she was unrecognizable. It wasn't until I got home and looked up the cast to discover that, yes, she was in fact Beth from Yellowstone, and I'm just like, that was Beth? Really? She barely did anything. That was a huge waste of time. But at least she wasn't as bad in this as she was in True Detective. That was a fucking waste of time. And the kids started off as a big focal point because they're the first people to witness these attacks. And the kid actors they got, as little screen times they have, do a really good job at portraying characters who are one-dimensional, but the level of fear that they communicate without even talking definitely elevated the material and added so much to this uncomfortable atmosphere. But they once again disappear into the background unless they need to be damsels in distress. And the other minor issue I had with The Curse, like everybody else, I do think that there could have been 10 to 15 minutes cut out of this movie, not because it was boring. I never took my eyes off screen and I always wanted to know what was going to happen next. But the dream sequences and certain revelations that the audience has already made but the characters are just finding out feels very unnecessary in the long run, and I also found the climax a little underwhelming. It was still good, but I felt that he utilized way too much handheld shaky camera work to mask the werewolf attacks. You could make the argument that it's supposed to be a little more chaotic and unpredictable because the majority of the survivors have never actually had to survive against this thing in the first place and have no idea how to fight it, but it did feel like a cheap way to hide the fact that this is, at the end of the day, a CGI monster. And when we do see it up close the one or two times, it's not bad. It's just, you've seen monsters like these in other horror movies. But still, The Cursed was one fucking good horror movie. Easily the best 2022 movie that I've seen for the first 2 months. It was stylish. It was well acted. And above all else, if you like A24 art house horror movies, this is going to be scary as hell. And for all those reasons, I'm going to give The Cursed a 4 out of 5. Definitely check it out. I got to find friends at work who like horror movies and maybe go see this again if I have time based on everything else that's going to come out, because the Batman's in a week and a bit. And I may or may not have a couple guests with me, so look forward to that. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen The Cursed, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.